Let's get started.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So, welcome to our next workshop of WinUni Research Bootcamp. So, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Giang Khoa, and I major in computer science, and I'm from the class of 2025.
Yeah, and I'm Wayne. I'm also a freshman majoring in electrical engineering. And today we bring you a workshop about data management planning. Together, we discover how data management planning can help you save time, get lost, and improve the quality of your research while fulfilling granting body and publishing requirements. In addition, we'll cover best practices in research data management and introduce you to helpful resources, including free online data management plan assistant tool.
So now I want to highlight our very special guest today. I would like to introduce our beloved Professor Lê Duy Dũng from the College of Engineering and Computer Science. He is a former senior data scientist in SM Personalization team at Grab Holdings, and he is also a former research scientist in School of Information Systems, Singapore Management University. So currently, Professor Dũng is working as an assistant professor at the College of Engineering and Computer Science at Wien University. So, hello, Professor Dũng. Thank you so much for joining us today to introduce our students about how to plan and manage the data collection process effectively during research. Okay, so now let's not keep our audience waiting longer. So, I will leave the main stage for Professor Dũng. Please start with your presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Khoa. Thank you, Nguyen. Can you all hear me well?
Yes, we
Yes,
can.
Professor.
Okay, yeah. So thank you very much for having me. It's my pleasure to have this opportunity. So first of all is to share with you a little bit about how to do data management planning. And on the other hand, it is also an opportunity for me to study it myself. So as I shared with Khoa and Nguyen at the beginning, I also need to read some material to find the content for sharing. So it's a learning and sharing opportunity at the same time. So thank you very much for that. I think there are lot of resources for everyone to read about data planning, data management planning. So for this workshop, I probably just want to highlight a little bit about your understanding of research data. What is the importance of data research data management and planning, right? And then what is this useful? Why is this useful for researchers? And at the end, maybe we have some open discussion if you want. Okay, so I think Nguyen, could you have to share the slide? Yes. Okay, so this is the title, Data Management Planning Basics. Uh, the outline is going to be very simple, right? We're going to talk about the concept of research data. We're going to talk about data management plan. What is a data management plan, right? And then what are the advantages for the researchers when preparing a DMP? DMP is short for data management plan, and a bit about what should be included in the DMP, and about the principles, the FAIR data principles that you should consider when preparing your DMP. And the source that I used to prepare this presentation is attached on the slide, which is more complete and more detailed. So as I said, if you are aspiring researchers, you should be able to do your own reading and researching. So I included here for your reference. Okay, so before I go into the definition of research data, I just want to hear from you. Maybe you can comment it on the YouTube chat. Uh, what is, in your opinion, what is research data? Or you can give an example of an item which you think is research data. Can you see it on the chat, Vin?
Yep, we're looking for it. Maybe take some time for that for our audience to think.
Yeah. How about I give my ideas?
Okay, sure.
Yeah, so for example, I actually look at some of your research projects, and I know that you are working about like recommender systems. So for
Mhm.
your project for recommender system, I think that the data that we need to collect is the users data.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so that's
Oh,
something.
okay. Yes, absolutely. That's one type of data,
Yeah.
user generated data, right? So we
Wait.
have statistics,
Yep.
survey answers. That's correct. Yes. Statistics, transcripts. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So I think we have any more coming? Transcripts, surveys, answers. We could talk about the format of the data, right? It could be numeric data, which is in the form of a tabular format. It could be images, it could be text, numbers, properties of materials. Yes. Okay. So yeah, the definition of data itself is very big, and it has a lot of it can it depends on your major, your domain, your research field. Then you have different types of data. Data could come from different formats, and we could have even data about data, right? Which is called metadata. So I include one video here to see what other scientists from different fields share their definitions about research data, right? So Zoom, could you have to start the video?
I define data very broadly. I think it's from a digital preservation perspective, data can mean digital information of any kind, from including very specific outcomes of research. So structured data, research experiments, and things like that.
Data are those observable bits of information that help us understand a political process, a social process, some economic behavior, whatever it is that people are doing. The data is that observable bit of information that we can record and later analyze to help understand those processes.
Data is evidence used for research and scholarly academic research of any kind. So when you make a statement about the world or about anything in it, you're relying on some evidence for that statement. If you say Proust has a wonderful passage, you're probably referring to a particular piece of text somewhere. If you say 95% of the people in the United States like vanilla ice cream, then there's probably some evidence underlying that. They both can be data if they're used as evidence.
Typically, there are multiple types of data that are being collected. The data are almost entirely numeric that I deal with. I don't really deal with images or maps or text even. It's all straight numeric, collected for the purpose primarily of research, not collected, say, for health claims or for other secondary purposes.
My data in my research, some of it is simulated data, some of it is survey data, some of it is data produced by government agencies. It's really all kinds. Sometimes experimental data. Most of it is observational data, data that comes from the world as it occurs rather than in a controlled laboratory. But really, all different types of data are part of what I look at. I'm more interested in the question that I'm trying to answer than I go find the data that I need.
Yes, I really like the last sentence, right? Some people are more interested in the research question, and then they try to identify the appropriate data source that help them perform and conduct that research. And especially in the world of research now, most of the research question need to be backed up by some empirical evidence. Then data is now more important than ever. I think as before. So to continue the workshop, so now we have a bit of understanding about research data, right? It could come from many formats, many types, and depends on your research domain. Your data could be images, text, or tabular, numeric. So now we should talk about a life cycle of research data management, right? We see that it is very important for doing research, right? So having a good management plan, having a good planning to manage the life cycle of the research data is crucial. So we all know that, right? So this circle is showing three main phases of a research data management life cycle, which including planning phase, right? Active phase, and then publication phase. So in the first phase, we call planning phase, right? That is when we develop research questions. And I like the last sentence from the video, which is, we are interested in the research question. And then we go identify relevant data that could help us answer that research question. So in the planning phase, you first need to have your research question, right? What do you want to answer? And then you look into the relevant literatures to see what people are doing, whether have anyone else already working on that research question, on the same research question, right? Or whether they have available data that you can use to answer your research question. If there is no available data that could be used for your research, then you need to create your own data, right? And all of this in the planning phase, you start to write your plan for data management. So that is what's happening in the planning phase of the research data management lifecycle. In the next phase, what's happening is that you have the data, right? You collected the data. Either you have it from a public resource, either you collect it, curate it, and store it by yourself, right? You need to do some kind of data analysis, some kind of data visualization, which helps you understand the data that you have, right? That is a critical important phase when you can actually create some insight out of the data. The data in the raw format might not be useful for your research. That's why you need to collect some inside knowledge, some key statistics, like summary statistics or inferential statistics from the data that you have, right? You should also have a way to organize and store the data so that it will be available, it will be available for your research, for your need at any time, right? You should store it in an efficient way so that whenever you need it, you get it fast, right? In database, we have the CIA criteria for data management. C is for I think CIA. I is for A is for accessible. C is for confidential, and I is integrity, meaning that we want the data to be correct. We don't want it to be wrong data. Okay, and this is an iterative process, right? Because you keep having the data coming, you need to keep storing new data, and then you make sure that the organization is efficient. So that's why it is an iterative process for sure. Okay, the last phase is publication phase. Is that when you have the research question answer using the data, right? After you do data analysis, then you start to write your manuscript for submission to some journal or article or conference. And then at this step, you send out your manuscript, you send out your research finding, and then you also do data archiving, and then data citation, right? You acknowledge the source of data that you have, you archive the data, and then it's also the step where you talk about how to make this data shareable, accessible to the research community so that they can verify your research, they can reproduce the research results that you show in the manuscript. So those are the three phases relating to research data management. So what is a data management planning? The title of the workshop is about data management planning. So what is a data management planning, or DMP for short? It is like a plan that documents how you're going to manage the research data during and after your project period. So we talk about three phases that relating to research data lifecycle, right? So your data management plan documents how you're going to manage those data throughout the three phases of your research. Okay, so then you need to create your DMP before the project actually starts, right? Especially when you write the research proposal, you should include the DMP in your research proposal so that the funding agencies, the committees, when they read it, they're gonna learn like what kind of data that you're gonna use to support to aid your research, right? And then this DMP will be revised during the project, because we have this life cycle, right? The data could come over time, or we could decide to reuse some of the old data, or we think that it should be changed. We did new kind of data because the current one is not sufficient for our research. So all of this require revision, and the document itself also need to be revised throughout the life cycle of the project. So DMP is a document that shows how you're going to manage your research data. So the advantage for researcher to include the DMP in your proposal is, first of all, it's useful for you to keep track the data in the whole project, right? You think it's not important, which it is a very costly process, especially if you work with a lot of data. You have a lot of data, right? You have to, it helps to improve the long-term value of the data. I mean, you don't need to store all the data in the world. You only need to store the data that is useful for your research, right? So then if you have a good plan of what kind of data you want to collect, you want to use, you want to store, then it's actually helps you to save a lot of cost and expense. And it helps to also plan like how you're going to share this data to the research community, to your peer researchers, right? That is important because in the research world, whether other people can reproduce the research result that you report is very important. It's like how other researchers can verify whether the number that you report is correct or not, right? Or you just make it up. So reproducibility is important, especially, I don't know about other domain, but in the domain of data science, machine learning, it is very critical to be able to reproduce the result, because otherwise no one can verify whether you have done valid research, solid research or not. Okay, so the next point is it also gives an overview of the cost related to your data management, right? So as I said, if you plan it well, you can estimate how much money you need to collect the data, how much of the cost is going to storing the data, right? And then later on, if you're gonna keep it forever in some form of archive that could be shared to the whole community, then it's also going to the cost. And the cost is going to your research proposal. So that would help you do budgeting better when apply for research funding. Okay, so it helps you to save time, right? As I said, if you can have good way to organize your data, it actually helps you save not only the cost, but also time and effort. Okay, so that beside the advantages for you as a researcher, it also gives funder, supervisor, college, review committee a better view of your plan, and then they can give you feedback of how you can organize your research data better, right? So accountability, a good DMP influence your project proposal. Of course, if you have a good way of planning, managing your data, it's going to help to improve your project proposal for sure. Okay, so this slide is very short. It's basically summarized what should be included in your data management planning. All right, it includes all the phases in the research data management lifecycle. You need to talk about how to whether you can reuse your data in the future, whether you have to collect it by yourself or you can use some of the existing available that created by other researchers. How are you going to store it? How are you going to archive it and share it to the research community? Right. Those are the things that are very specific about the research data. And other aspects that you should mention in the data management planning is the general information about the project, who are responsible for this data, for managing this data, what are the rights. The rights here is who has the access rights, for example, whether it's open access or whether it's closed access or it requires permission. And especially if you store the data about, let's say, the healthcare data of patients, right? You don't want to open it to everyone. Of course, you still want it to do your own research, but you need to guarantee the privacy of the people involved. You need to talk about how you're going to document your data, right? And describe the metadata well. Metadata is also very important. You need to talk about how you organize the data, and it is the data about the data. So if you have good metadata, it helps other people understand your data better. And ethics and consent, as I said, you cannot share the data freely without the consent from the parties involved, right? If your data is based on the survey answers, whether those survey answers require the user to expose their identity or not, right? Or if you want to share this data with other people, you need to have consent of the people who perform the survey. I particularly was interviewed by several researchers when they're doing some research about future of AI for job. So then anytime they need to, they want to share, publish a manuscript, they need to send me a draft of that paper, and then they want my comment in case if I don't want to include my comment in that particular manuscript. So these are the things that you should mention in your DMP as well. Okay, the next slide is the FAIR data principles. When we talk about data management planning, we should describe it following some principles. So here, the FAIR actually is the initial of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So what are those four principles? So first is findable. Findable, it means that your data management should be efficient, you should provide good metadata. You should have a persistent identifier, because when you have good metadata, right, people can find it easier. And if you have a persistent identifier, let's say using a DOI or other form of identifier, then people can discover the data more efficient, right, using some discovery tool, right, such as some search engine. And if you write good metadata, it could help some search engine to index your data better, which would help to provide better access to more people, right? If you don't really have good description of your data, then maybe your Google search engine might not be able to index it. So that is about findable. You need to make sure that your data is findable. Accessible is another principle where you should follow some standard protocols. For example, this data could be accessed through some URL, right, with securities features like HTTPS or HTTP. So you should make sure that you have a good protocol for people to access your data. Of course, it doesn't mean that it is open access. If you have sufficient authentication for access the data, then you still guarantee the privacy and prevent the sensitive data to be exposed to the public. Okay, so accessible means that you should follow some standard communication protocols, but also guarantee sufficient authentication. Interoperable is also relating to the previous principle, which means that you should follow some international recognized standards to organize the data so that people, when they read it, they should be able to understand it. And also, like if you follow standards, and it might be able for other researchers to reuse immediately the shared data. Providing context sufficiently, it could give the audience better understanding of how you organize the data and in what context you get this data. Reusable is about documentation. You should really think about how you're going to document and describe your data, so that when you share it to the public, whether people can understand how to read your data, how to understand your data. And of course, you should have clear user license. Okay, so about some of the tools that people can use to write your DMPs listed on the slide. So I would let this as homework for everyone to read it at home. Basically, it's going to provide some templates that everyone could follow. And I think, I'm not sure whether most of the time funding agency will also have their own template if they require you to include the DMP in your research proposal. Okay, I think that is the end of my sharing. So I'm really happy to hope to receive questions if you have any regarding data management planning. So as I shared at the beginning, I'm also learning this. So then it's also better if we can have open discussion from the audience as well. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, Professor Yong, for your great presentation. We surely have several questions for you. So it's time for the Q&A questions right now. Our audience, if you have any questions or concerns from Professor Yong about data management planning, please feel free to type in chat. In the meantime, while waiting for people to type in the questions, I personally have some questions to ask. So, why do you have any?
Oh yes. So the first question I want to ask is how much time do you think that we need to prepare our data management plan?
In general, I think I would say the more the merrier. I mean, the more time and effort you plan to think about how to manage data for research, then you're gonna have a better estimation of the cost and situation, what kind of data you're gonna need, and it's gonna help you a lot in writing your research proposal. So I think uh, I personally wrote a DMP for like uh, 2 weeks to a month. Of course, you need to put it in the context of in writing your research proposal, right? It has to be related to the kind of research that you want to do. And while you're revising the research proposal, you also revise your DMP. So that is the general idea.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Mm.
Okay. So there's one question. Oh.
Yeah. So can we have the slides to look for those resources later, Professor Yoon?
Absolutely. Actually, I encourage everyone to go to the source of the URL that I include in the first, the second slide, maybe. I think that's more complete for sure.
Yeah. Thanks, Professor. I have a personal question. So,
Mm.
so as you mentioned before, like we have a lot of steps in creating a DMP. So, in your experiences, because you have, you know, created many of DMP before, so, uh, like, I wonder what is the hardest step in creating a DMP, and do you have any tips for this step?
Okay, so what is the most difficult part of creating the DMP, right?
Yeah.
So I think this relating to a comment in the video by a professor, right? I think the most difficult part is what is really your research question? Uh, I mean, are you going to look for a new treatment uh, for cancer, for example, or in the domain of computer science, are you going to create a new algorithm that perform better than state-of-the-art algorithms? So if depends if you have a clear research question, then it's gonna have to guide your DMP a lot better. So I think the key thing is how formulate good research question. That's gonna lead to have a clearer uh, data management planning. So that's one. Tips is easily once you have the research question, you can do some surveys for relevant research, whether you look around in the research community, whether people have working on the same research question and what kind of data that they are using, whether it's available, whether it's public. If it is not, then you might be the one who created. Then when you create it, then you have to design the experiment, for example, design the process of collecting the data. It could be that you do human studies. You should have surveys, for example. Then it all comes down to the research question that you want to answer and whether you have available data to support your research or not. So that is my opinion. I'm not sure whether some faculty in joining the workshop also can give their comments.
Yeah, I can see some questions in the comment now.
Yeah.
So yeah, here you go. Do you have any recommendations for us about data management when carry out undergraduate research?
So for data management, not only for undergraduate research, any kind of research, I think you should have. So suppose that you have data already, right? Then you should learn how to analyze it, understand it better. Using data analytics skills to get the most out of the data that you are storing, right? So that's one. But before we talk about data analytics, we should also talk about how to collect the data efficiently. And I think it is a non-trivial question because it is usually very difficult to identify what kind of data we need to collect at the beginning when the research question is still not clear. So over time, I think you need to spend time to think about the research question, and then when it's clear, it's going to have to help you to think about how to design the data collection process better. And after you collect it, of course, that's a question of how you going to analyze it better, and then also store it in a way that is always available and efficient for you to query while doing your research. Okay, recommendation. I don't really have any specific recommendation. Probably it depends on the context of your research.
Yeah. Thank you, Professor Yu.
Yeah.
So I can see Professor Brainy from College of Health and Sciences. She has a comment. For qualitative research, you also need to look for some theories that are related to your research questions and data, and thus
Yes.
lots of reading and sense making are required. What do you think, Professor?
Yeah, I think I totally agree with Professor Prani. And so as I shared at the beginning, my research mostly work on data that in the digital form already, right? Either it's user-generated data when you do research on recommendation, or you use benchmarking data. It's usually in the digital form already. So I think they already have some form of managing the data efficiently to some extent, right? However, for a lot of other research, the data they're not necessarily in the digital form, and when you collect it, right, it could be using the survey question, interviews, and then you need to listen to the interviews again to extract the information. So depends on the research and yeah, it's require a lot of reading and sense making. So I totally agree with this comment.
Yep. Thank you, Professor Brainy. So we have another questions. Yeah. So how should you express your collected data? Like, is there any particular tool for that?
So I think I mentioned it in one of the slides. You should follow some standard format of your research community. Like you look in the literature to see how they store the data, right, and then how they make it in the format that is shareable to other researchers, and then we follow that standard because that's the way people have been using to share the research data. So I think the easiest way is just to follow the standard. If you're talking about accessibility, then you can try to find some archive hub that allows you to upload your data, or you can create your own data archive and make it accessible through some communication channel, like through an URL where people can download it, or it could be in the form of API call if you are having a really huge database. So it depends, and I think my general recommendation is just to follow the standard and look at the relevant work in the literature to see how people are sharing the data.
Thank you, Professor Yu. We still have time, so would you like to answer a few more questions?
Sure, yes. Happy to, yes.
So Juan, can you
So the next question is, what are common mistakes that students or researchers in general often make while making their data management and planning?
What are the common mistakes students or
Yeah.
researchers often make? So I would guess, that's my guess actually, it's usually at the part where they estimates the effort that they need to, let's say, if you need to create your own data. Sometimes it's usually is underestimation, right? You underestimate the effort that you need to spend to, first of all, collect the data, to manage data, and then not only storing and collecting and storing, right? Sometimes you need to create a different variance from the data that you collected. So, for example, you can not just store the data in the form of the audio of an interview, right? You should actually extract useful information from that interview audio, or even with the survey answers from participants. You need to get the key information that could be useful for your research. So not only storing the data, but also creating useful record out of the data that you collect. So usually I think the most common mistake could be underestimate the effort that you need for data management. So then the advice is maybe think careful about the effort that you're gonna need when creating, collecting, and managing the research data.
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think we still have some more questions in the comment.
Yeah.
So yeah. So the question from Singis: how should enterprise react if their data is leaked and the hacker can download the company inner data?
I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer this question. How should enterprise react if the data leak is discovered and hacker download the company? So we're talking about the reaction of the companies, right? But I think we should talk about how what should company do or enterprise do to prevent this kind of incidents. So of course, with the technology, right, with engineering skills, we have different way to prevent it. But of course, I cannot say on behalf of enterprise or company, but my personal opinion is that, of course, data is being monetized at the moment, right? So then data leak is one of the unavoidable risks that could happen. So for company side, they probably need to have a better security system, make sure that data communication is secure, and then the way they monetize the data, they should make sure the privacy is guaranteed. And out of the topic a little bit, since they are monetizing the data from online user, right? Then they should also pay back to the user who generate the data. So I think that's one of the comment that I have, but I'm not sure that enterprise think about it in the same way.
Thanks for your sharing, Professor Yu. We still have one more question.
Yes.
For you? Yeah. Okay. So a data collection is From this question is from Minh Quân. So a data collection is usually really huge. So
Mm.
how can we have a sense of how much data is enough, especially when there's no standard in this kind of research yet?
Mm.
A very interesting question, I think.
Yeah, that is a tough question actually. So if you're talking about companies, enterprise, I think they just try to store anything they can, right? Maybe because they can afford the cost of storage. But when how to make use of those data, then it is a different story. So how much data is enough is a tough question, and I think in the domain of data science, they have a big community looking at efficient learning, meaning that how much data is needed to do some certain task, and then they base on the uh, theory of probability and statistics to quantify maybe how much data is enough. So it is how much data is enough to make a, high quality conclusion for your research, for your understanding of the data at hand. So I think the standard here is still being studied, but unless we can borrow some theory from statistic to provide some quantitative evaluation about how much data is needed and enough and sufficient for the research question. Yeah, I hope this answers the question.
Yes, yeah, I agree. So yeah, uh, I think it's time for us to uh, say a few words for you. So far, do you have?
Yeah, okay. All right, everyone. So I can see that there's still many of you who have questions about this topic, but we want to apologize that our time is up and we should conclude our session here. So sorry so much for this inconvenience. And please don't worry because we will collect all of the remaining questions and send them to Professor Dũng and then give his answer back to you later. So to conclude, I want to say thank you so much, Professor Dũng, for spending your time talking with us about such essential topics and also for sharing with us such powerful tools that we can use for our data management planning. So we believe that after this workshop and all of our participants can understand the importance of this process and they will be also be very confident in creating their own one. So once again, thank you so much for joining us today and we look forward to seeing you in offline classes soon.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to see everyone soon.
All right, everyone. Uh, so thank you all for joining our sessions today. But don't leave yet because now we will reveal the magic code for you. Uh, by the way, please don't forget that we will still have two sessions, very essential workshops tomorrow by Professor Anita, Professor Brandy, and Mr. Nguyen. Uh, Also, the tomorrow mini event will also help you practice and hone your presentation skill to get you well prepared for the final presentation day. So please join them all if you have time. And thank you so much, and we'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.